In the next few examples, we're going to want to be able to take content from multiple different sources and then paste it on some kind of extra sheet at the end just for consolidation purposes. Or maybe you want to be able to take a sheet that's sort of like a template sheet, and then you want to be able to reproduce it 12 times for every month of the year, or 10 times for every year in a decade, or something like that, in order to be able to create specialized versions of that particular template. If you wanted to be able to do that, you're going to have to start to play with sheets and know how to use the coding that's required to do so. We've already seen the feature called Worksheets.name. Now you're going to need to specify exactly which worksheets you're talking about. So let's go ahead and add a couple so that we actually have something to name. There's also a method called Worksheets.add. And if you execute it, you'll see that you have another sheet that's actually being added into our workbook. Now this sheet is called Sheet 3, but technically it's not Worksheet 3, it's actually Worksheet 1. It's Worksheet 1 because that's the order that it is in Excel. There are a couple different ways that we can refer to a sheet. What we can do is we can say Worksheets 1, that's going to refer to whatever the very first worksheet is in my workbook, and then I could say select. Now that's going to select the very first ordered worksheet in my workbook. If I wanted to select the second one, I would use 2. Now I've selected the second one. Or if I want to actually use the name of the worksheet, in those parentheses, I can actually put in the name of the worksheet instead. In different cases, you'll want to be able to know that both of these are possible. And that is selected the sheet called number 2, which of course isn't actually number 2, but that's what it's called. If I wanted to rename this, I could say worksheets, and we'll say we want to rename this one that's currently called number 2, and I'll refer to it by its numerical value. It's the third sheet in order, so I'll say worksheets 3, and the name is something else. And that changes the name of my worksheet here. Now, if I wanted to be able to copy and paste these worksheets over and over and over again, what we're going to be doing is using a couple of features, including after. What we're going to be doing is using the Worksheets.add feature, and then later on, we're going to be seeing the Worksheets.copy feature. And we're going to need to do that actually within a macro, but these are the basics of that particular principle. And if at some point I decided later on that I wanted to delete one of my worksheets, I could of course say worksheets, and we'll say it's the very first one in order that we want to delete. Worksheets 1, delete. And I will get this little window that pops up that says, are you sure you want to do that? That's a normal Excel window. Yes, I'm sure. I'm going to go ahead and click on delete. If you haven't done so already, why don't you run over the principles of Worksheets.add, Worksheets select, the few different naming conventions that we have for specifying a specific worksheet, renaming that worksheet, and deleting a worksheet. Why don't you go ahead and give it a shot and come on back. For the next particular large exercise that we're going to be employing, we're going to need to know a couple of other little extra helpful tidbits. These are functions, essentially. They're going to be able to figure something out. There's one called DateSerial, and there's one called Format. Now, normally both of these do deal with numbers, specifically dates in both of these cases, and we're going to figure out right now how to actually use them. Now, these are simple examples, and if you open up the file called DateSerial and Format, that's going to walk you through how to actually use both of these. There are little guides on here that give you an example of code that could be used to exemplify each one of these particular functions, although I'm not going to be focusing on those little help windows right now because we're going to be doing it together. So let's say, for instance, that I need to be able to populate all the dates in the given month. Or maybe I just need to populate exactly 30 dates in this particular month for whatever reason I have. What I can do is create a macro that is going to cycle through all the dates in order in this particular month. Now, in my spreadsheet here, there are a couple functions here that are just checking and seeing which month it is right now and what year it is. So basically, I want my macro to be able to pick up the current month value and the current year value, and then be able to cycle through the different days that might be in this particular month. And let's just say we're going to focus on 30 for now. maybe whatever our practice is requires us to actually only have 30 days. So I'm going to be creating a for next statement that's going to be able to cycle through and make the first date, and then make the second date, and then make the third date of the month, etc., all the way through until 30. So I am going to have a for next loop, and this is going to look like this. For x equals 1 to 30. We're just going to keep it simple for now. And then we're going to start using a tactic that allows Excel to figure out exactly where it should place a particular value. So I'm going to say in a particular range, we'll start with cell D5. We want it to insert a value in that particular cell. But in the second iteration of this for next loop, I want to go to the next cell down. And after that, I want to go to the next cell down. So in this case, what I'm going to be doing is using my range tool. And since I'm counting up rows here, I can actually get it to count up rows for me. Now, of course, I could also use cells here. I just happen to be using range because we're talking about rows. Those are numerical, and so I can count them up. But if I needed to count up columns, I would probably use cells instead. Anyway, so we're looking at range. All of these values do happen to be in column D, so I'm going to go ahead and put that in. Now, I'm starting with D4, but I'm not going to type that in here because I'm going to allow VBA to figure out what D and then the combination of 4 plus X. So in this first case, the first time I go through my iteration, X is going to be equal to 1. So this is going to start on D5, which is 4 plus 1. And then the second time it goes through it, it's going to go to D6, which is X equals 2, D, starting with 4 plus 2, so it would be D6. And then the second time it would be D7, and the third time it would be D8, etc. So I'm actually going to let VBA here figure out what cell it should be placing this particular value in by counting up using my for next loop. And then I'm going to say the value in that particular cell should be a particular numerical value, in this case, a date. And I'm going to use a function called DateSerial, which allows me to put in portions of the date that I can rely on, like month and year. And then I can allow my for next loop to actually loop through the values for days by saying that it equals X. So the first time it enters it in, it's going to be the first date of the month, and the second time it will be the second date of the month, etc. Now, here's how the DateSerial function works. I do need to put in, of course, the name, which is DateSerial. And then I'm going to open up my parentheses, and you'll see here in the hint window that it says the year has to be an integer. So maybe I want to pick up that integer from my actual spreadsheet here. If I want to do that, I'm probably going to end up storing that content in a variable, so I'm going to need to create a couple of variables. First of all, let's start off with X. That's going to be for next loop. And then let's say we're going to store the information for month and year both as integers, and that's how they show up in my data set here in Excel, so that's going to be fine. So dim, and we'll call it month value as integer. And then we'll make another one for year value. And then we can actually declare what these are going to be. In our particular circumstance, our current month value is always going to be here. Our current year value is always going to be here. So I can just do a simple plug-in here. So month value is going to be range cell B5, the value of that cell. And year value is going to be range C5 and the value in that cell. So it's going to be grabbing those integers and storing them in these particular variables. And then what I can do is actually use these variables in my DateSerial function. And my DateSerial function requires me to first plug in the year as an integer. Now, the good thing is that I actually already have that stored in that variable that we created and plugged in. So I'm going to say, use my year value as the year. And then it needs the month. So I'll say, here's my month value as the month. And then the day, this can be my X. So I do need to put in a next X at the end, which I do have. And I'm going to go ahead and run this. And it should populate all the days of the month. And there we go, nicely, just like that. Now, let's say I want to be able to format these in a particular way. Maybe I even want to get these dates to show up as day, as in Wednesday, and then the date, and then the month, and then the year. And for whatever reason, I'm going to need to group this content later on. I'm going to need to actually use it as text values. So I don't want Excel converting it into numerical values. I don't want the serial number associated with it anymore. This DateSerial function, this actually does take into account the serial number, and it stores the serial number. And you'll notice that because if you click on any of these cells, go to your Home tab and go back to General, you'll see that the serial number is actually associated with that particular date value. That's what we're used to seeing. But maybe I want to be able to store these as text. If I want to do that, then I'm going to need to use a different kind of a function. And this is going to be the format function. Now I'm going to create a couple of variables here because I'm going to be doing a for next loop again. So I have my X, and that is going to be an integer. And then I'm actually going to get my spreadsheet to pull the date from right here. That's just going to make it easier for our example right now. So I am going to create a variable that's meant to store the date. So I'm going to say date value as date. And yes, date is a data type. It's one of the data types that we talked about earlier. And then I could say for X equaling 1 to 30, just like before. And then I am going to need to grab this date value here. So let's go ahead and state the very first date value here. So I could say date value equals the range of whatever cell we're in. We know it's going to be somewhere in column D, and we're going to let the for next loop figure out for us what the row is by using for plus X, just like we did in the last example. So that's actually going to store the date value that was already in that particular cell, and you don't have to put spaces in here. I just prefer to see them like that. And then what I'm going to do is actually use that content to paste in the range, that same range, so D, whatever 4 plus X is, and I wanted to use this format function. Now, the format function is going to be able to use the date value, and then I get to specify exactly how I want to format this date value, and we'll say it's long date. I do need the end of my next loop, and there it is at the bottom. I do have my next X. That already came in with this macro before we even got in here. Okay, and if I run this, this is going to display for me all of the long date versions of each one of these dates. But you will notice that in these cells, I don't actually have the serial number. This has now been converted to text. So the difference between using DateSerial and using format is that DateSerial actually maintains dates as a particular serial number, and format allows you to convert them into text values, which is pretty cool. Why don't you go ahead and give this a shot, finish out your macro here, test it out, and make sure that indeed these are being stored as text values, and when you're done, come on back. For the next couple examples, we're going to have to become a little bit more familiar with the copy method. Now, in this case, we're talking about the copy method that is a method of the Worksheets object. The deal with the copy method is that it actually inherently also includes a paste method. If you copy it, you are going to paste it. And so they're built into the same tool. So if you want to copy a particular sheet and place it somewhere, you are going to need to specify exactly where you want to place it. And so now we start to get methods that have these specifications afterwards, in which we specify exactly how we want this method to behave. In this particular case, we choose exactly where we want it to be pasted, essentially. So in this case, before worksheet 4, or in the second case here, after worksheet 2. These are called arguments of methods, and we're going to be using them in the next example right here. You're going to want to open up the file called Sheet Template Generator. And essentially what we're going to be doing here is taking this very first sheet, which is a template sheet, if you will. This is a design that I want to be able to create over and over and over again for every month of the year. Now, I'm going to create a for next loop in order to be able to create 12 of these. And in order to name them after I've created them, I'm going to use the DateSerial and Format functions, which are going to allow me to cycle through months of the year. So if you open up your Visual Basic for Applications window, you'll see that there's already some macro code here. Now I'm going to go ahead and do this from scratch, but if you don't want to, you don't have to. And I'm going to start off by declaring my variable, which is going to be x, and this is going to be an integer variable because it's going to be used in my for next loop. So for x equals 1 to 12, because I want to create 12 of them for every month of the year. And then I'll say worksheets, specifically the very first one, I want to copy it. And after I've copied it, I want to place it in a specific spot, which in this case is going to be after worksheet, whichever worksheet I'm on. So the first time I go through this, I want to paste it after worksheet 1. The second time I do this, I'm going to want to paste it after worksheet 2. So think about it like this. If I already have a sheet in here, and I'm going to be pasting this after sheet 1, that basically makes this thing that I'm pasting now worksheet 2. So that's now become worksheet 2. So if I want to select that worksheet that I've just actually put in there, I'm going to have to say, okay, worksheets select, and what most people would do is put in the number 2 here, but I do want this to be able to count up so it can actually put in a name for every single one of these sheets. So I'm going to say X, but it got pushed to the second spot there, and the second time I do this is going to get pushed to the third spot, and the third time I do this is going to get pushed to the fourth spot. So I'm just going to say X plus 1, and that's going to figure out exactly which spot it should be in. And I'll say that the name of that worksheet, and this is going to be determined by the DateSerial and the Format functions. The nice thing about the DateSerial is that it actually uses serial numbers, which it allows it to be able to cycle through numbers and count up pretty quickly. So if I want this sheet to be named by the month this particular sheet corresponds to, I could say that the very first time I go through this, I want to name the sheet after January. January is associated with the number 1, and if this is the first time that I'm going through it, X is associated with the number 1 too. Number 1, it's associated with the number 1 as well. So my DateSerial is going to require me to put in a year, but I'm not actually going to end up using the year because all I care about is the month. So I'm just going to put in the year there, and it doesn't really matter what year you're using. You could put in year 1. Again, like I said, it doesn't matter because I'm never going to be using the year. I'm only going to end up using the month. And I'm only using the DateSerial because it's able to cycle through numbers here that are associated with months or with days or with years. Okay. So in my month spot, however, I am going to put X there. So the very first time this happens, this date is going to correspond with some kind of a date in January. And the second time it goes through it, it's going to correspond with a date in February. And the third time with March, etc. And I need to put in a day there as well. But again, I don't care about that one. So I don't care about year, don't care about day. So I'm just putting 1 for those. You guys could put whatever you want for those. The only one that I really care about is X. And now that I've actually determined a date that is in January the first time this happens, and February the second time it happens, and March the third time it happens, now I need to make my format function grab this serial number and be able to extract from it the month. So if you remember from our last lesson on the format function, it was able to take a serial number associated with the date and then populate a particular display for that date. In the last case, we just asked it to show the long date, but you can also say, hey, I want you to show just the month. Now, if you're going to do that, you would simply put in quotations just like we did last time, but I would use this little coding. 3Ms is going to be an abbreviated month, and if you wanted to do 4Ms, that would put the fully spelled out version of the months. You can do whichever one you like. I'm going to do 4Ms. And that is actually going to pull the month information from my DateSerial. So it's cycling through. The first time it goes through, it's grabbing January, and then the format function is actually extracting the word January from this. And I'm using that to name my worksheet that I just put in there. Okay, and I'm going to do this over and over and over again. So I'm putting in the next X. And then at the very end, when we are all done, I'm going to say, okay, take that template, that very first sheet there, Worksheets 1, and I want you to delete it. I don't want that one because it's not going to have a label that makes any sense. It's just still going to say sheet 1. And all I care about is the ones that are actually named after the months. All right, so here we go. Now we're going to go ahead and run this. I'm going to go ahead and click on play. And when I do so, Excel is going to say, are you sure you want to delete that very first sheet? That you can't undo that. And I'm going to say, yes, I'm sure. Go ahead and click on delete. And there we go. Now I have 12 months, one for every single month of the year, and they are all designed based on my template. If you haven't done so, take a second to code your macro over here on the right-hand side that is supposed to cycle through all of your sheets and name them, but only after, of course, you have copied them and placed them after the very first worksheet. Take a second to do that, and then come on back. Welcome back. For this next session, we have the challenge of having a rather large workbook, and I have a set number of sheets that I want to be able to access. However, they happen to be buried pretty deep in my workbook, and I'd really like for them to be at the beginning of the workbook when I need to take a look at those particular sheets. The sheets in question are a group of sheets that have to do with the Southeast division, and you'll see that I have one here called Southeast Team, Southeast Clients, Southeast Marketing, and there's one more called Southeast Sales. And I'd like for these to all be placed at the beginning of my workbook when I am taking care of a project that has to do with that particular division. And so I'm going to need to make a macro that's going to be able to do this. Eventually, if I made a macro for every single one of these divisions, I would probably place them all as buttons on the interface, and then I could easily reorder my workbook whenever I wanted to. We're going to go over an example of just creating a macro that's going to reorient the Southeast division to the very front of our workbook. And then you can extrapolate from that and do the remaining divisions if you so choose. So in order to do this exercise, we're going to want to open up the file called Reordering Sheets and open up your Visual Basic for Applications window. Mine is open on the right-hand side. And I am going to find our modules folder, go into Module 1, and I'm looking for the macro called Southeast Move. So it should be the second macro in a collection of macros here. And again, like I said earlier, you can complete the rest of these if you would like. I'm just going to go ahead and do the one for Southeast Move, and here we go. So I'm going to use Worksheets, and I'm going to refer to the name of the worksheet. Now, I happen to know that the name of this worksheet is going to be SE Sales. This is the first one. And I'm going to use a method called Move. Now, when we were checking out the method called Copy, we noticed that we had to put a little argument in here that said exactly where it's supposed to be placed afterward. In this case, we're going to move it, and we also need an argument that explains exactly where we're going to put it. So I'm going to say move this and place it after or before a certain place. So I could choose after, but I'm going to choose before because my objective is to put this at the very beginning. So I'm going to say before, and I'm going to put my colon and my equals sign. That is the syntax that is used for arguments of methods. And then I'm going to say put it before whatever worksheet is in place number 1. And I'm going to do this for every single one of the worksheets that has to do with the Southeast division. Why don't you do this too? Do this for all 4 of the worksheets. And when you're done, come on back and we'll keep going. Okay, I've completed that. If you haven't completed it yet, just go ahead and pause the video and complete it with me. I just didn't want you to have to watch me complete all 4 of these. But that's basically the task that I want to accomplish here, is to be able to move every single one of these sheets that have to do with the Southeastern division. And then when I go ahead and run this macro, you'll see that all of those sheets, Southeast, 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 get moved to the very beginning of my workbook. And that's the basics of using the move method. Why don't you go ahead and complete that up and then come on back. Welcome back. And the last statement that we're going to need to cover before we do our large macro example to finish out the scripting section of the class is going to require us to learn how to print certain worksheets of our given selection. So go ahead and open up the file called PrintOut, PrintPreview. That's going to allow us to open up the Module 2 folder. Module 1 will look pretty familiar. That has all of our move scripting that we did in the last example. But Module 2 has an open macro waiting to be scripted called Print All Sheets. So if you wanted to print all of your worksheets at the same time, you could put a little bit of script in here that said worksheets.printout. But for our purposes, in order to just be able to cover this really quick, you don't have to do it here in the macro. We can actually do that in the media window. So we can say worksheets.printout, and I can execute that. And assuming that my computer is hooked up to a printer, then obviously it would print it here. But in my case, I am not. And so it is trying to print it to some other kind of a file type. But it did work there. Now, there are a couple different options that we can take a look at here. There's PrintOut, and then there's also PrintPreview. For those of us who thought the print preview was actually gone, that it was just incorporated into the print window now, mostly that's the case. However, there is a feature that you can access only through VBA coding that allows you to actually preview the document in a separate window. And you do that using Print Preview. And here it is, worksheets.printpreview. Why don't you take a second to give that a shot? You can choose a specific worksheet, or if you choose worksheets and do not specify a worksheet, you will get the print preview or the printout of all of the worksheets in this particular workbook. However, you can specify one in particular, and then you'll just get the print preview for that particular sheet. Why don't you go ahead and give that a shot and come on back, and then we will embark upon our last and largest project that we have done in the class so far. Welcome back. Okay, here we go. This is the big one. This is our practice video that's going to incorporate a ton of the things that we've been learning over the last 10 or 15 videos, or really the entire course so far. What we're going to be doing is using everything that we've been learning and creating a macro that is going to do a few different things. In this scenario here, we have a situation in which we have this document with all the different information for each particular division's teams and clients and marketing and sales information. And every quarter, let's say, we need to print out logs for our teams for each month in that quarter. So we have this particular team. You can see this sheet here on the left-hand side that says this is the sales team. And what I want to do is create a macro that's essentially going to go down here and type in the word log, and then give me some nice headers in here that would create the skeletal structure of a document that would be a log, that would allow our team, this particular team, to be able to log information about their sales calls. Now, I want to be able to create this log for every single month of the quarter. So since my quarters change, and since I want to be able to do this for all my different divisions, I'm going to be creating a pretty hefty macro here. And here's what it's going to do. First of all, it's going to select the division that I'm interested in. And let's say in this case, we're going to start with Southeast. So we'll choose a particular division of interest, and then all of the sheets pertaining to that particular division get moved to the front. We did that a couple of examples ago. It's going to be exactly the same. But after I move all of that to the very beginning of the document, then I need to put in the headers for a log here in this particular document. And then after that, I'm going to need this particular sheet to be duplicated 3 times, once for each month in the particular quarter that I'm in. So we will be using our copy, and we're also going to be using our format and DateSerial functions in order to name each one of those sheets depending on whichever month it is in the quarter. Now, we are going to allow our end user to put in whatever quarter they care about. And so we're going to have to create some macro code that also allows them not just to insert a number for a quarter that they want, like quarter 2, but depending on whether they type quarter 2, then I actually get the months that are in that particular quarter. So that's our big old task. And at the end of that, what we're going to do is actually print out the logs for each one of those months in that particular quarter for that particular team. And that's our task. So to sum it all up, our end user is going to be able to simply type in the division that they want and type in the quarter that they're interested in. And it will automatically print for them the logs for that given quarter for that particular division. And for them, this is going to end up being a task that saves them at least 15 minutes if they're an advanced Excel user, or it could save them maybe an hour if they're not such an advanced Excel user. So that's the point of our macro here. And you're going to want to open up the file called Move, Copy, and Print based on user input. Open up your VBA window on the right-hand side. There is a few modules in here. There are some completed versions of these modules, but the uncompleted versions are the modules, or the module called A Large Macro Example. In there, we're going to be creating all of our custom scripting. So if you want to do this with me, that's the macro that you want to go into. However, if you just want to see it written, you can go to the one called Completed Log Dupe, and that will actually show you all the code that we're going to be entering in here. So this is going to be my parent macro. I am going to use this parent macro to call to all these other macros in here. And the reason that I'm creating a parent macro to do this is because eventually by the end, I want to create a button here, and that button is going to run all these macros, and each button can only be associated with one. So I do want to make a parent so that I can attach that to the button. All right, but let's go ahead and start making each one of our individual macros. All right, so we're going to start off by doing an example that we played around with a couple of videos ago. All we're going to be doing is accepting user input. And based on my user's input, I am going to move a certain number of sheets to the beginning. There are already macros in here that are created that are going to move these for me. There is a module called completed move. In a couple of videos ago, we did create a southeast move example, and that just moved all the worksheets that pertain to the southeast to the beginning of the document. In this particular document here, all the other divisions are fully fleshed out, so we do have macros for each one of those other divisions already completed with their move macro. So here we go. Now we actually have to create the input box, receive the user's input from the input box, and then accomplish this particular task based on their user input. So I am going to create at least a few variables here. So I'm going to start off by creating a variable that's going to contain the message for my input box. And that is going to be a string variable. And then I'm going to be making a couple of variables right now that are going to contain integer information. I'm going to allow my end user to type in a number to pertain to whichever division they want to select. And so I'm going to save that in this variable called region. But because they're going to be typing in a number, I can say that's a variable. So we're going to have one called region, and then I'm also going to have one called yes, no answer. And you saw me use this for a message box in a few examples ago. The reason we're going to use this again is because just in case they enter something we don't want them to enter, we want to give the option to try it over again or not. And we're going to use a message box to do that. And that, of course, the buttons that you click on in a message box return an integer value. If you want to learn a little bit more about that and you didn't see the video on that, there is a video that deals with message boxes and you can check that out. All right, so here we go. We're going to go ahead and plug in the values for my message. Now this is going to be rather long, which is why I'm actually storing it in a variable, because otherwise this huge long chunk of code would look really weird inside of my input box code. It would just look like there's too much stuff there, and when I'm reading it 6 months from now, I would have a hard time dissecting it. So I'm just going to put my whole block of text here. So enter the region of your choice. And that's what we'll allow our end users to choose from. There we go. And then I want to create a hard return in my input box there. So I am going to put in my VBCRLF constant, and that's going to allow me to make a hard return in my input box. There we go. VBCRLF, and I am going to need those ampersands on either side of that. And then just so that you guys can see me typing in the rest of this stuff, I'm going to put in my code continuation character there at the end. This is also for me for 6 months from now. When I'm trying to read this thing, it's easier to see it blocked out like this. Okay, so my end users are going to be able to see the following options. So they will see an option for Southeast, and then we'll make a hard return. And I'm not going to type all these out right in front of you because that would be boring to look at. I am just going to type out all of the divisions that you'll need here. You'll need Southeast, you'll need Northeast, you'll need Midwest, you will need Southwest, you will need Northwest, and finally, Far West. Why don't you take a second, pause the video, and complete a set of code here that's going to give the end user all of these options: Southeast, Northeast, Midwest, etc. And they can type 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 for each one of those respectively. And then come on back and we'll continue the code. Welcome back. Now that we have actually put in the message here, let's actually use that message, and we're going to make our input box. And the input box, whatever my end user types, is going to be received in this variable that we've already declared called region. So region is going to be the result from the input box. And my input box is going to have my message as the prompt. And then the title here can just be something like region. And then I can just put in some default text like enter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. Now, based on their input, I'm going to need to do a specific thing. I'm going to need to run one of those move macros that we looked at the very beginning. So I'm going to make a select case structure here that's going to allow me to very easily create a result from each one of these cases. So in the case that they enter in 1, then I want to call upon southeast move. That's what that's named. There's a naming convention for all these, so it's going to be pretty dependable. If they type in 2, of course, that's northeast. So then I would call upon northeast move. And you can probably see the convention that's coming in here. It's just the abbreviated term for that particular division and then the word move. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video again, or rather you should go ahead and pause the video again and complete your code there and come on back, and then we'll keep going together. Welcome back. Okay, let's keep going. All right, so we've created a case for each one of these. Now, if they type in something that we're not expecting or we don't want them to type in, I'm going to make an else clause here. So I'm going to say case else, and then we're going to give them a message box. And they're going to be able to click on one of the buttons in the message box, which I'm going to store the input from one of those buttons in my yes, no answer variable that we declared at the beginning here. And that's going to receive the input from my message box. And maybe we'll say something like, you didn't type a number between 1 and 6. Try again. And we will specify that we want a VB yes, no box. That's going to give them the choice between yes and no. And then that choice is going to be stored in my yes, no answer. Now, if yes, no answer ends up being yes, if they say, yes, I do want to try again, in order to start this macro all over again, all I have to do is call to the name of this particular macro, which happens to be called move by input. I do, of course, have to end my if statement with a bookend there. And I also have to end my select statement with an end select statement there. And there we go. That's the entirety of this particular macro. Why don't you go ahead and pause the video and just make sure you're all caught up with me. And your code should look just like this. And if yours looks like mine, then come on back and let's keep going. All right, so assuming that your code looks like mine, we're going to keep on going. So in the next little macro that we're going to be making here, we're actually going to be putting in some of the text for the log. So this is going to be pretty easy. This is going to be some of the beginner stuff that we were doing, except we are going to be using the range object and the end method, which is going to allow us to figure out where this list ends, because maybe some of my teams are 100 people long and some of my teams are only 6 people long. And so I want to essentially start really far down, and then I'll just say end. So go up and find the very first cell that has content in it and select it. And then once you've selected it, I want it to actually offset downward by a couple of rows here. So I'm just going to say offset. And I do put in my rows first. So we'll just say offset by, I was going to say 2, but let's say 3. Let's give it some good healthy space there. Okay. And now I'm going to actually put in the word log so that I know what the data is there. And then we'll put in some headers right underneath it, in the row underneath it. So I'm going to say selection.value equals the word log. And maybe I also want this text to be bigger than the rest of the text and bolded. So I'm just going to make a little end with statement so that I can do this pretty fast. So selection.font, and then we'll say the size of that font equals 20, 16, whatever you want. And then we'll also say bold equals true. So we're going to make it bold. And I'm going to end my with statement. That's going to make that look a little bit bigger than everything else. And it's also going to make it bold. And then we're actually going to put in all the headers here. So let's move one row down. And then we're going to put in the title there called client name. And then the other thing that I'm going to do is make it bold. So I'm going to say selection.font.bold equals true. Now I'm going to be putting another header in here, but I don't want to go down again. So my offset is no longer going to go down by one row. It's going to go to the right by one column. So this time I'm going to say selection.offset, no rows down, but one column to the right, and then select that, and then put in the word contact name. All right, this little block of code that we just did, you're going to do this over and over and over again in order to create all the headers of interest for you. I'll give you some suggested header titles. Maybe you want the date information in there. Maybe you want the duration in there. Maybe you want some notes about the call in there. So why don't you just take a second, pause the video, and create a little code block for each one of these headers that puts in the title for that particular header there. Go ahead and give that a shot and come on back. I finished out those few blocks of code there, and now I have all the headers that I'm going to need for this particular macro. And so now it's time to move on to the duplication process. So let's go find the little macro that says duplicate monthly log. Now, in this case, we are going to create a for next statement in there. We're also going to create a select case statement that is going to, we're also going to create an inbox that allows our end user to choose which quarter they want to populate for. So the inbox is going to ask them which quarter, and they can type in 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. And then in the case that they type in 1, then something special is going to happen for quarter 1. In the case that they type in 2, something special is going to happen for quarter 2. And then we'll go ahead and get the macro code in there that actually takes care of the result of that. So if I wanted to go ahead and start this from scratch, I would probably be creating some variables here that are later going to store some information. Namely, I'm going to create a variable for my for next loop. Now you don't have to do this, but I like to do that. And I'm going to call it Y this time. I've been using X so far throughout our practices, but I'm going to use Y in this particular example. Why? Just because I feel like it. Okay. And then I am going to need to put in a input box. That input box is going to have to feed its result into a particular variable. So I'm going to need another variable that can just receive the results from the input box. Now I'm just going to ask my end user to type in a number, meaning the variable that's going to contain that information can be an integer variable, just like the one that I've already created. So we'll call this the quarter select variable, and I'll just put a comma in there. And now I can put all these variables on the same line. So the quarter select variable, which is going to receive the user input, that is an integer variable. And let's go ahead and actually create that variable. So quarter select is going to contain the result from an input box that asks, which quarter is this for? Now, eventually, I'm going to have a for next statement that is going to populate this log, the log that's going to be created, the log that we created in the last macro. What we want to do is duplicate this log 3 times over, depending on which quarter we're in. It's going to name it by the months in that quarter. So I'm going to create a for next loop here, and we'll say for Y equals 1 to 3, because there are only ever 3 months in a quarter. And what I want to duplicate is the copying of those worksheets. So I'm always going to start with worksheets 1 because I've already moved the worksheet that I'm interested in to the very beginning. So worksheets.1.copy. And then I'm going to specify in my argument that I want to actually place that after the very first worksheet in the workbook, or in this case, I want to place it after worksheet Y. So the first time this happens, I want to place it after worksheet Y. And the second time it happens, it's going to place it after worksheet 2, because at that point, Y is going to be equal to 2. Okay. Now, think about it. We've already done an example like this, so let me just remind you. once I actually place that worksheet, let's say we're going through it for the very first time, at that point, y equals 1. So when I place it after worksheet 1, then the worksheet that I'm actually focusing on is now technically worksheet 2. But the second time I go through this, then it's going to end up actually being worksheet 3. And the third time I go through this, it's actually going to end up being worksheet 4. So if I want to select the one that I just put in, I'm going to need to say worksheets y plus 1, because it is going to be pushed to the right of would-be y. And we'll say the name for that is going to be based on a particular month. So we're going to use our DateSerial function to be able to cycle through the different months. So I'm going to start by putting a DateSerial function in here. And just like in the example that we did earlier, we don't actually care about the year. You could put in the year 2016 or 2017, whenever you are watching this particular video. So you can go ahead and put that year in, or you could just put in the value of 1, because it doesn't really matter. You're not going to use the year in here at all. What we are going to use is the particular quarter. But if I used quarter select here and said use quarter select, or if I used Y, then the month would be January, February, or March. But that doesn't really allow my end user to choose a particular quarter and have it populate the months for that particular quarter, right? So I'm going to have to do something a little bit more interesting. I'm going to have to create a statement up higher. And yes, that is incomplete. That's okay, because we're just following through with this logically. Right now, quarter select is equal to the value of 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. But later on, maybe I want to be able to use this value to say, okay, then start. If they typed in 1, that's the quarter select. But I want that value to switch to January, which is also 1, so that would be fine. But if they type in quarter 2, then I actually want it to start with April, which is month 4. If they type in 3, I want it to start with July, which is month 7. And if they type in quarter 4, then I want it to start with October, which is month 10. So I'm basically going to create a select case statement that is going to reassign the value for quarter select depending on what the end user typed in. So if they typed in 1, then we're going to reassign the value for quarter select to 1. That'll be fine. But if they type in 2, then we're going to reassign the value of quarter select to start with April, which is 4. And if they choose quarter 3, then we're going to reassign the value of quarter select to start with July, which starts my 3rd quarter of the year. And in the case that they type in the 4th quarter, then I want to reassign the value of quarter select to start with month 10, which is October. And then in the happenstance that they type in something else, I do want to put in a message box that allows them to choose something else, right? So I'm going to say yes, no answer. But wait a second, I don't actually have a variable called yes, no answer up here yet. Well, that's eventually going to receive input from a message box. So I know that's going to be an integer. So I'm going to go ahead and go back up here and say yes, no answer. And there are the 3 variables that I'm going to need. Don't worry, there aren't going to be any more. So yes, no answer is going to receive the input from my message box here. And my message box is going to say, or you didn't enter a valid quarter number. Try again. And we'll allow them to type in yes or click the buttons for yes or no. And then we'll create a if clause that says if they say yes, then we're going to start all this over again. Duplicate monthly log, that's the name of this macro. And I do need to close out the bookend for the if statement. I also need to close out the bookend for the select statement. And now I can get back to what I was doing, which is creating my for next statement. My last line here says worksheets Y plus 1. That's going to choose the particular position of that worksheet that I just placed. The name of it is going to be DateSerial, my DateSerial function, which I'm putting in 1 for the year because I don't really care about the year. And then I'm going to use quarter select. Now what the new value is for quarter select. And we're going to say, okay, the first time it goes through this, I want it to use the very first number here. So in the first case that it goes through quarter 2, let's say, I want it to choose month 4. But the second time it goes through it, I want it to choose month 5. And at this point, if I just put in quarter select, it's only ever going to choose month 4 every single time. So I'm going to have to say quarter select plus Y, whatever Y happens to be at that moment. Now, that's going to make the first incarnation of this actually go to 5. So I'm going to say -1. And what's going to happen here is it's going to take into account the growing value of Y, but then just subtract 1 from it so it actually goes to the correct month there. And then I'm putting in the day. Again, I don't care about the day, which is why I'm typing in the number 1 there. So it doesn't matter. And I want it to populate as the fully spelled out month. Now, I did forget to put my format function here, which of course is the whole point of this, so that I can actually get my format function to populate the given month there, okay? So this last little statement that we put in here that is MMMM, of course, that does pertain to the format function. We did cover this exact usage of format and date serial in a previous video. So if this is looking a little bit foreign to you, go ahead and check out that earlier video and it'll look like it makes a little bit more sense. And I'm gonna have to finish out my for next statement with a next Y. Okay, and then I should be all done. Make sure that you have completed this particular macro here, and then come on back and we'll keep going. All right, so the last thing I need my macro here to do is actually print out all the worksheets here. So I'm just going to say worksheets 2, because remember, the very first one is going to be Southeast team. But the second one is going to be for January, and the third one is going to be for February, and the fourth one is going to be for March, because that's the order that they're going to be placed in. So I'm just going to say worksheets 2, print out, worksheets 3, print out, and worksheets 4, print out. And you could definitely use a for next statement to cycle through those numbers there if you wanted to. And assuming that we have done everything correctly, that we haven't misspelled any variables, and that we have been placing everything in the right spot, then when we come back up to the very top, we're just going to go ahead and enter in a couple of call statements up here at the very top. So you're going to want to put in call, and then call to each individual macro up here. You can go ahead and do that right now and then come on back and we'll actually run this code. All right, so now that we put in our call statements here, we can actually just click on our play button. And if it's all working correctly, it's going to ask us for the region that we want. And I can enter in a particular region, like I'll just say region 1. And then it'll ask us which quarter this is for. And maybe I'll test it out by saying quarter 2. And then it generated those, and now it's going to print them for me. So I'll say that the very first one is supposed to be April. The second one is supposed to be May. And then the third one is supposed to be June. And there we go. Now it is completed. And I do have sheets for April, May, and June. And that's exactly what got created as a PDF there. And with that, we are done with our massive macro example. Congratulations, you have now officially created some pretty hefty macro script. We are done with the major portion of the class that takes care of massive macro scripting. So if that's what you were in it for, congratulations. Come on back though, because we're going to be talking about creating your own functions. If there's a specific kind of a function that you want to be able to create that isn't already in Excel, that's what we're going to be doing next. So come on back and we'll learn a little bit about that. Welcome back. And now we get to some really exciting stuff. We are going to start taking a look at some UDFs. This stands for user-defined functions. You are the user. You're going to be defining some functions. And so what I want you to do is make sure that you have the user file the work files called UDFs. Make sure that you got that open, and also that you have your Visual Basic for Applications open. You are going to need the module called A, User-Defined Functions, open. There's another module in here called Completed, so if you want to follow along and not actually do the scripting, but just want to follow along and see exactly what we're doing, you can go there and check out and see what has been pre-designed for you. But if you are doing a hands-on experience with me, make sure to go to the module called User-Defined Functions, A, User-Defined Functions. We're going to be designing our own function here, and in order to do that, you're going to want to insert a new procedure. So we're going to the Insert drop-down menu in Visual Basic, and I'm choosing a procedure. But this is not like any procedure that we have inserted so far, because this is a function procedure. And I'm going to go ahead and name this. Well, I'm going to take a road trip pretty soon, and I'm going with a couple friends of mine. Altogether, we have 3 different vehicles. We have a Prius, we have a Mustang convertible, and then we have an RV that we're taking along so everybody has somewhere to sleep. And so I want to be able to figure out for every stretch how much my fuel is going to cost. It's one of the things I have to figure out. And so that is the kind of function that I'm going to design here. And I'm going to call it cost for gas. Now I'm going to give myself a little bit of space here. It helps when you're designing these functions if you have sort of given it a little bit of thought and pre-designed the formula that's going to be required by this function. Good reasons to design your own functions are, if I do this 6 times a day and I don't want to have to plug the function in, that's a good reason to do this. Or maybe I do this once every 6 months, and every time I do this, it takes a whole lot of thinking power to remember exactly how to calculate this thing. That would be another good reason to design it now. Take the time to do it now, and then 6 months from now or 6 weeks from now or whenever you have to do this, all you have to do is plug in the numbers. So in this case, I only go on road trips about every 6 months or so, and every single time I have to remember how to do this function. So I am just going to program it, and from now on, I won't have to do the formula at all. I'll just do this really cool function. So here we go. The basic breakdown of my formula is such. So I'm going to say cost for gas, the name of this function. Cost for gas equals the miles of each stretch. Okay, because I want to be able to calculate this for each stretch of my trip. The miles of that stretch divided by the miles per gallon of that particular vehicle multiplied by the local gallon cost. I'm going to be going to a few different states, so I do want to be able to calculate this cost based on the local cost of gas and not just the national average. All right, so these are going to be the titles that I'm going to take into account, also known as arguments. And in case you've been wondering this whole time what these are for, this is what they're for. I'm going to go ahead and put my arguments in there. Now, this looks a little bit more like the regular functions that you're used to in Excel. You do have the name of the function and then the opening and closing of parentheses, and the arguments are inside those separated by commas. That's exactly what we're going to do here. I'm going to let VBA and therefore Excel know exactly what kind of data should be expected in each one of these arguments here. So I'm going to say miles of stretch is going to be a double data type. That's one of the preferred data types because it's a number, but it can be all different kinds of numbers. It can be some pretty long lengths of decimal placeholders, pretty flexible. So miles of stretch is double. The other 2 of these are going to be as double as well. So I'm going to say miles per gallon as double, and the local gallon cost as double. And I know it's kind of crazy, but that's about all there is to it. So let's go ahead and use it. I'm going into Excel and I'm going to say equals cost for gas. And there's my cool function that I just designed. I can double click on it. If I have all of the arguments memorized, I can go ahead and put them in here. But you'll see that I don't get those nice little hint windows that I get from the pre-designed Excel functions. And so I would love to open up my function arguments window so that I can actually get the titles of each one of these. So miles of stretch, let's see. The miles per gallon, we're figuring it out for the Prius first. And over here on the left-hand side, we do have the breakdown of miles per gallon. 51 for the Prius C. The Mustang convertible gets 29, and the RV gets 9. about the same as my El Camino that I drove around in high school. So miles per gallon of our Prius, first of all, is 51. So I'm just going to go ahead and click here on 51. And then the local gallon cost for this particular stretch is 286. Pretty steep, but I'm starting from California, so there it is. All right, I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And now I'm going to use my autofill handle to populate the rest of this column. I'm going to choose to fill without formatting. I'm going to keep my table nice and looking good. All right, and that's about it. So it can be as simple as this. And I could fill out the rest of my table here and say miles of stretch for this one is this, and miles per gallon is, starting with my Prius again, and the local gallon cost is about this for Oregon, and click OK. There we go, and fill without formatting. And maybe I want to clean that up a little bit with my dollar signs. There we go. And I do have a cool little sum function down here that's already programmed in there that is calculating the total for me. And that's about all there is to it. So take a minute and complete your function for cost for gas. And I am going to maximize my Visual Basic for Applications window so that you can see this function. Why don't you go ahead and give it a shot and come on back. All right, then, let's move on to our second example. This is one of my favorite professional examples to calculate percent of change over time. This tends to be somewhat important in a lot of industries, somewhat being an understatement. Being able to figure out the percent of change over time of a particular set of information. Now, there are many different ways to calculate percent of change over time. But in this particular case, the way that we are figuring this out is by taking the current and subtracting from it the previous value, and then we're going to divide that over the previous value. And that is going to give us a nice little calculation of percent change over time. So here we go. I'm going to go into my Visual Basic window. I'm going to click on Insert, and I'm going to insert a new function procedure, and I'm going to call this percent change over time. So just like last time, the designing of this function is going to be pretty easy if I've already sort of figured it out and written it down and know exactly how I'm going to calculate this. So I'm going to start by saying percent change over time equals, and I'm going to put this in parentheses, current minus previous over previous. Now, I didn't actually have to capitalize that there because it would have gotten fixed later on. All right, so current minus previous over previous, and that's going to be my calculation there. I am going to need to go inside my parentheses here and define exactly which data types should be expected here. So the current value, it should be double, and previous should also be double. All right, and there we go. That's all there is to it. So I'm going to go ahead and use that over here. Percent change over time. There it is. And let's see. The current value, let's see, we're looking at snowfall in inches here for Tahoe. So current is 424, and that was in 2009. And previous was whatever is above that. So the very first time I calculated this, I'm not going to get an answer here because I don't have any previous data, but that pattern will work for me because then when I autofill down, then I'll be grabbing the value right above it, which will be the previous value. Okay, so the first time is going to look weird, and then I'm going to autofill down. And there's my nice little calculation of percent over time. And that is populating on my chart here. Okay, pretty cool. All right, and if I want to calculate percent change in working capital, I'm going to use the exact same calculation, percent change over time. Okay, and here we go. This is my current capital, and my previous capital is going to be right above it. I'm going to click OK. Again, it's going to look weird the first time. And then for the rest of them, there we go. All right. And with that, we've calculated percent change over time. Why don't you give this one a shot, and then come on back, and we'll get into a little bit more complicated stuff. All right, for this last UDF example, What we're going to be doing is figuring out the surface area of our house because we got a paint job coming up and I don't know how much paint to get. Now, in this example here, the math is going to take you back to geometry class. So if you didn't like geometry, don't worry about the math here, okay? You don't need to wrap your brain around that. You don't have to remember that at all. All you have to remember is that as complicated as this function is about to get, ideally, in the end, you're only going to have to plug in a couple different variables, right? You're going to have to plug in this number, the height of the house square block, which is this, the height of the roof triangle block, which is this here, the width of the house, that's that, and the depth of the house, which is that. So those are going to be the only 4 things that you're going to have to plug in. Now, when you're programming this from the beginning, it is going to look a little bit complicated when we're doing it together. And that is because it is a little bit complicated to figure out. And that's why I want to turn it into a function so I don't have to figure it out anymore. I have it at the top of my mind right now. I'm going to make it into a function and I'm never going to have to think about it ever again. So here we go. I'm going to insert a function here. I'm going to insert a procedure. Again, that's going to be a function procedure. And we're going to call this house surface area. Okay. So eventually, the calculation that's going to happen is it's going to say house surface area equals each one of these panels. So the front and back, these are going to be the same size panel, right? Then the sides, these are going to be the same size panel. And then the roof sides, those are going to be the same size panel too. So what we'll do is we'll take into account the front and back, add it to the sides, and add it to the total size of the roof. Eventually, that is going to be the entirety of my function. Now, I am going to need to do some slightly more complicated calculations here. Okay, the sides of the house, that's going to be easy. Sides equals the height of the house times the depth of the house times 2, because there's going to be 2 sides. Okay, so the sides equal the height times the depth times 2, because there's 2 of them. So that one's going to be pretty easy. I do know now that I'm going to have this thing called height of the house and this thing called depth of the house. Those are going to be arguments. Let's go ahead and define those right now. So height of the house should be double. And then depth of the house should be double as well. All right, so we got that one. Now, the front and back is going to be a little bit more complicated because if you remember back from geometry class, a triangle is normally calculated by the height times the width divided by 2. Now, it just so happens that there are actually 2 of them, so you wouldn't have to do this much work. You could just say the width times the height. But anyway, we're going to do it the long way so that we can appreciate exactly how cool this function is going to be by figuring out all this stuff when we're done. So we're going to say front and back equals, and eventually the front and back is going to equal the height of the house times the width of the house. Okay, so that's just this simple little height times the width. We're taking care of this square block right here. And then we're going to do this little triangle piece separately. We're going to add that. I don't really need to put these parentheses in here, but I am. We're going to add that to this little panel right here, which is 8 feet high and 7.5 feet wide. So that's this little half a triangle here. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to say height of the roof times the width of the house divided by 2, right? Because this little panel here is half of 15, half of the width. And I'm going to surround that with little parens here. And I want this whole thing multiplied by 2 because there are actually 2 of them, right? I have one of these on the front and one of these on the back. So I'm going to do this little calculation here, and then I'm going to multiply the whole thing by 2. And yes, there are some redundancies here with numbers that you could get a little bit more fancy algebraically in here. All right. And then the last thing I'm going to need to take into account is, oh, by the way, let's not forget, we have this new argument called width house. So let's go ahead and put that in here. So height house is double. I'm just going to put it right here. Width house as double. There we go. All right. And then the roof slant, okay. This is going to be, I need to figure out how big this thing is going to be. What size this particular line is right here, the slant of the house. Now, if you guys remember back from geometry, you can do your a squared plus b squared equals c squared to figure out exactly what the size of this side of the triangle is going to be. So we're going to go ahead and do that. Now, normally, if we were going to do this, we would use the a squared, right, which would be the width divided by 2 multiplied by itself. Okay, times the height of the roof multiplied by itself. That's the squared part. Okay, so I'm going to do that first. Height roof times height roof. I don't have anything called height roof yet, so I'm just going to add that in while I'm thinking about it. Height roof. There we go. As double. Height roof times the height of the roof. Plus, and again, I don't really need to put those parens there, just to help me visually later on. Plus the width of the house over 2 times the width of the house over 2. Okay? And this is supposed to equal this thing squared. So my roof slant is going to be this square, and this is a cool little VBA function here. You can just put SQR, and it'll figure out the square root of this here. And then I'm just going to plug that into this thing called roof slant. Okay. Now, I probably could use a couple of variables here. Probably could use variables for front and back and sides and roof. And eventually, if I'm going to figure out what the total roof is, I probably want to get a little equation here that figures that out. So I figured out what the roof slant is so far. So now I got to figure out what the actual roof is. So here we go. Roof equals roof slant times the depth of the house times 2, because there's 2 of them. So with that, I've actually figured out what the size is of each panel of my roof. And I'm going to multiply that by 2 because I have 2 of them. And now finally, I have this thing that says house surface area equals front and back plus the sides plus the roof. I do have a couple of things that are undefined here, a couple of variables here that are undefined. So I'm going to go ahead and make some variables for this. So I'm going to say there's a variable called roof slant and front and back and sides and roof. I'm going to do that up here. Sides, front, and back. Roof. And roof slant as double. And with that, this should work. If I haven't spelled anything incorrectly, this should work great. So I'm going to go ahead and plug this in and see if it works. Here we go. This is the house surface area. The height of my house is this. The width of my house is this. Depth is this, and then the height of the roof is this, and I'll click OK, and I happen to know off the top of my head that that is correct. All right, so give this a shot. I know this was a rather complicated example, but that makes it a perfect example for why you would define it as a UDF and use it as a UDF from here on out, as opposed to figuring out the formula every time you had to paint your house. Here you go. Here's your formula. If you haven't done so already, go ahead and finish this and then come on back. And with that, congratulations on completing the Visual Basic for Applications Excel course. Feel free to go back anytime and review these files, the notes, and also the PowerPoint for a little refresher. It has been an absolute pleasure teaching you from afar. Hopefully I'll get to meet you in person one day. If not, then I will see you in another video.